That's a big reason why we started the score, is to literally provide a voice and a space of marginalized communities, and hopefully present a more positive narrative than that filled of assumptions and stereotypes. So I'm fully present to who I am, and I know that people hearing and seeing how proud I am to be Latino and specifically Mexican is hopefully going to allow for the next kid or a teacher to allow that space for their kids to be as proud as I am.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Eric Jimenez. Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm great, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for joining me. You are the second of the two co-hosts of the Score podcast that I'm having on in the month of July. Thanks for joining me.
No, man, thanks for having me, and shout out to my brother Justin on the previous episode, and got to listen to it before we jumped on, and I got to give him a shout out. He did pretty well. Yeah,
we had a good conversation. We really covered a lot of ground. He was really, really helpful and open, and I really enjoyed that episode. I had a good time editing it up and putting it out there for everybody.
Nice.
So, I mentioned to Justin when we talked that one of the reasons why I, wanted to get you guys on the show is because when the Black Lives Matter protests sort of were at their peak, I really was thinking really hard about what I do with this show. And then I listened to a bunch of your episodes based on some recommendations. I had you guys on my iPhone for a while. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't hit the play button on that first episode yet. And then I did when all that stuff started going down. And the first episode I listened to, I told Justin was the one titled White Fragility.
Yeah, that one blew up a little bit.
Yeah. So, I know Justin talked about it in his episode, but for those who haven't listened to that yet, because everyone's going to go listen to that, right? Can you talk a little bit about your podcast and what you guys do?
Yeah, for sure. So Justin and I are we've known each other since college, but we got the ability and the opportunity to go work together while we worked in Houston ISD together. And so what this stemmed from was, I can say probably twofold, was one that he and I would have these conversations in our conference period before or after school, and we would talk about some of the challenges that we were experiencing in serving an urban and specifically a lower income school with a predominantly Latino and African American population. And a lot of our conversations were always solution based, because we'd go to sessions and clinics and it almost seemed like it was just a venting session. I'm gonna use the word vent instead of the other one. And they were just, and at times I was hesitant to raise my hand and provide an option or a strategy for my colleagues, because I felt like I didn't have enough sweat in the game. I hadn't received enough awards. I hadn't received the ratings yet. So I kind of always kept my mouth shut unless somebody asked me directly. And the other part was I was finishing up year 2 of my doctorate and reading all these research articles that would be, applicable to our setting and some of the findings that we could apply. But I was thinking to myself, what public school educator has a subscription to a scholarly journal or is going to pay for individual articles to read them? And then on top of that, read a 20-page article to, decipher what the findings were. So I thought of a way to say, how can we create this platform and this voice and an image that will be solution based, and on top of that could potentially be, fun to listen to. So as you picked up, Justin has the gift of gab, and And so I myself, I've been a DJ since I was the age of 14. So some of my DJ voice imitations will come out sometimes in the podcast, and so all that to say is that we you just kind of say, you know what, man, let's try it, let's throw this out there, let's see what works, and so it's been an experience of bringing all of my experiences together. To be honest, because I was that high school kid that was mixing down on Audacity and making mixes for my DJs, like intros and different things. So the post production aspect was very easy for me. And so it just, specifically speaking about that white fragility episode, though, it was inspired by my colleagues getting silenced on several Facebook groups that were genuinely trying to find solutions and asking questions on how to deal with the trauma that their students were currently or will experience coming back into their schools dealing with the Black Lives Matter protests, and they were getting shut down. And so it just kind of it inspired me to call that out, just saying like, hey, how come we created all these Facebook groups to deal with the pandemic and online teaching, but at the minute we address social emotional learning and how it will be traumatic to our students of color, we shut people down because it makes people uncomfortable. And so that's kind of what inspired that episode, and to our benefit, it blew up. So we've gained a lot of listeners from that episode. But what was cool about it is part of that was a little bit of a marketing tactic. Because once you listen to the episode, we weren't, it was a borrowed title from the white fragility book, and it was a response to how people were reacting to these questions, and ended up being positive for us. But once people listened to the episode, they're like, whoa, this is great, this is applicable, I'm listening. And we had such a great response from our colleagues throughout the country. Now we have listeners in all parts of the country, and we're extremely grateful for them, and we've been able to reach more people with our message.
Eric, can you tell me your origin story? How'd you get started in music?
I gotta credit my brother. I have an older brother of 11 years, and he played alto saxophone in high school band. And when he went off to the Air Force, he pretty much gave me his saxophone that he worked 2 summers for at a yogurt shop to be able to pay for. And so I was inspired, by him, and actually a cumbia artist. His name is Fito Olivares, and that was, pretty much a consistent artist and sound that was part of my life soundtrack. And so it included the saxophone in cumbia. And so, and to that, it was influenced by rock and roll in the 50s and in the state of Texas to include saxophone in that genre. So I wanted to play sax like Fito Olivares, not jazz. It was literally, I wanted to play like cumbia music. So went through middle school band. I did the traditional 3 years, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And then I did my high school 9 through 12. Now, what's different about my experience is I am a product of the Houston Independent School District. And so I went to, all my schools were Title I, and predominantly Latino, with except for the exception of my high school, it was extremely diverse. So my middle school, I had 5 middle school band directors. I'd never moved schools, so that should tell you about the retention. We only had 1 band director per year. So one of which I got fired because he wouldn't teach us. I remember throwing a football at his head. And after I told him to please teach us, and he's like, just go practice. I was like, practice what? And he's like, just sit down. And so I got frustrated, threw a football. Nobody snitched on me. He turned around and cussed me out. He got fired. So we got another one and another one and another one. So I went through 5 middle school band directors in middle school. My last one there was phenomenal. He was a retired director, Jack Lucas, from the Houston area, and was living in the community and decided to come back and help. And so I got him for 1 semester. Then I went to high school. Then I got 5 more high school band directors. So I experienced a lot of turnover, and I ended up being like drum major and section leader, and doing all that thing, all while I started like my own DJ business, and I was doing that off to the side as well. So from there, I chose to pursue this career in music, and that happened because my sophomore year, the head high school band director, who it was his first year teacher, and he's still a great mentor and a friend of mine, as Richard Smith was my high school band director. And he invited us to a Maynard Ferguson concert where his community big band was opening up for the concert. And so I invited my brother, and given that he would, I assumed he would like appreciate it way more than anybody else in my family, given his experience. So I'm sitting in the front row, and of course, hearing and seeing Maynard play, and his leads and his trumpet section was mind blowing. And he asked me, he's like, "Hey man, what do you want to study?" And I said, "Well, business." He said, "Why business?" I was like, "Cause you did." And he's like, nah, man, you don't need to do that if it's just because he's like, why don't you become a teacher? Why don't you teach music? I was like, because they don't make money. And then he told me a phrase and he said, do what you love and the money will come. And at that age, I decided that I wanted to pursue becoming a band director and return the favor of that experience that my high school band director gave me.
So I want to listen. I want to ask you about something that you said in there. You talked about the turnover in your band directors, and I know there's more to your story that we have to kind of untangle here. But you mentioned the research. Can we talk a little bit more about this? Can we explore this idea of turnover in band directors in Title I schools?
For sure. So, it just so happened I just did some research on a literature review that I'm doing on Latino band director perceptions of working in an urban setting. And so what I found to be an underlying issue is that of teacher education programs, not just of music education programs, is that we are using terms that at times mean other than white and middle class. For example, the term urban has been coded to just say that they're black and brown kids or other than middle white. When people say I work in a diverse school and it's predominantly Latino, that's not diverse, that's a majority Latino school. And so what we have not been equipped with is how to use vocabulary in the vocabulary that's appropriate to identify these groups of people. And so we gravitate towards what we feel is appropriate or safe, and we use those terms. And so specifically speaking, I can agree to this because of my lived experience and what I've been reading in the research. It takes a special set of skill sets to work in an urban setting. And because it's a unique set of challenges. And when you walk in with these preconceived notions or biases, and at times whether they're implicit or overtly just being done by you, it can be passed on and it create this tension between you and the students. And so what happens is you get frustrated and you seek out a mentor, especially within music education. That's kind of a big thing that we push. And your mentors usually are not from those settings. And they tell you, you know what, just go find another job. And I've heard that more often than not. And I don't say that. I literally say, okay, well, what's happening? What can I help you with? What solutions can I create? Then if we get to a point where it's like, okay, you're fighting an uphill battle and you've tried everything you can, there are other schools and other kids that need you. And I'm never against for the livelihood of a person to do that. But before we get to that point, and I don't just encourage people to leave because of some issues. It's like, let's find out what the issues are. And I think that lends to not knowing how to navigate some of the whether it be cultural tendencies, socioeconomic issues, what all these things that urban schools present itself is just a matter of getting taught on how to deal with those. And so earlier today, a colleague said, you either learn by fire or you don't. And so I think because I come from that setting, I was a lot more receptive to some of those issues because I knew where they were coming from. I probably understood the why behind it. And I was way more willing to deal with those because I saw myself and I saw my parents within those of my students' parents. And so it's kind of like, here's my way of being able to give back and help another student.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges and maybe some of the special skills that you mentioned? I hope that I have a lot of young band directors listening that, I don't know, maybe thinking about a job like this or how would you sort of quantify those things, I guess?
So one that comes to mind is the parents don't care. And that could be reflective in your concert attendance. If you're a high school marching band director, whether they go to contests or they go to football games, and we use those as indicators from our experience in like what the research has shown is that the majority of white students are becoming teachers, then more than likely their experience reflected that of a comprehensive band model, whether it was in suburbia or even in an urban setting, but they're going off of what they experience. And it's like, well, no, we had a booster parent organization of over 100 parents. And they were always there. They were helping us unload. Where I had a school where I literally had one parent go with us to our region marching contest. She was the only one that unloaded and students had to do it with her and we did it ourselves. And so when I didn't have that active parent participation, I didn't make them wrong for it. I started really digging into the why. One of the reasons was economic instability. So a lot of my parents had 2 to 3, if not numerous jobs, which honestly prevented them from being there. And so when my students would complain about, the parents not being there, which, as a kid, you want to see your parent even just be present at these concerts and at these events to show appreciation. I would in return say, okay, I'm teaching you to have an appreciation for this art form and this activity. And I know when you become a parent, you're going to understand the importance of this. But I also don't want to make your parents wrong. They are doing the best they can with what they know how to do. And to me, I see strength and resilience in your parents because they're doing everything in their power to make sure that you have everything you need. And so I use that just those, and from my experience too, because I bring that story up because my dad had that sit down with me, and my father has a master's in social work. And so one would argue that he's much more assimilated to the American culture than not, but he still carried this mindset of when I called him out on it one day, I said, man, you don't, why would I invite you to my jazz concert if you don't go? And he sat me down. I was a senior. I thought I was a little bit more brave than I was. And he flat out told me, he's like, show me the manual on what it is to be a father. And I was like, what? He's like, where's the manual, the how to? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, I didn't have that example. And so you're expecting me to do things that I don't know how to do. And then he followed it up and he said, but I'm killing myself to make sure you never go without. And he apologized. He's like, I'm sorry. I will make more of an effort to be more present at your events. So that specific event for me realized that my dad was not intentionally not being present at my events. It's that he truly did not understand the value, because I honestly, I never really went up to him and said, I would love for you to be there, Dad. It was just one of those things that I like, hey, I'm having a concert and he didn't show up. And I was like, and it just kind of kept digging at me until I had, the braveness to call him out on it, and I got squashed. But I also understood his side of the story. And I carried that into my lived experiences, because that's why I said I saw my parents in my students' parents. And so in return, it created this appreciation for their parents, where they at times could create this discord that could carry on into adulthood. And I didn't want that for my students. I wanted them to realize that some of the things that we might do, especially in lower income communities, we have to start looking at those things as strength, as resilience, as power. Like a mom walking one of my students to a band practice for summer band while it was raining because they didn't have a dependable vehicle. I look at that as strength. Like what parent would do that and make sure their child rides safely? So that's one of the components is knowing how to handle students of lower income situations and creating access points for them that does not make them wrong for being of lower income.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in there. And the one thing I love that you talk about, and you said it a couple times, is don't want to make the parents wrong, don't want to make the kids wrong. I keep coming back to this, and as I do these interviews, it was a recurring theme for me over 169 episodes is that I'm always comparing what people say to my experiences. And, I think about what my parents went to and what they didn't go to, and the way I treat my own kids. And these things are passed down. It's hard to break that chain of behavior. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of not being judged for it on both sides, right, is really important. Anyway, just yeah. So what happened next after high school? So I know you and I talked before the episode, and you are teaching at your alma mater. You want to talk about how your college experience at an HBCU, how that decision came about, and then we'll talk about how you ended up there.
For sure. So, man, I was destined to, and I know I could have. After high school, I could have gotten into practically any university in the country. I had all the accolades. I had the extracurricular activities. I owned my own business. I was director of LULAC, the oldest and largest civil rights organization of the country for the youth. I had all these literally like bullet points that said I was set to excel in my academics in higher ed. But when I decided that I wanted to be a music educator, I was the biggest fan of traditional show style, HBCU style bands in high school, because my band was predominantly operating as a core style band. And so I remember just consistently asking my high school band director to let us play a couple tunes that I would hear other bands that we would go up against play. And of course, the influence of the movie Drumline during high school was a big part of that as well. And I got fortunate enough to have a math teacher my junior year. I was in statistics. His name is Jesse Watson, and I saw him wearing his Prairie View shirt, and he would wear Alpha Phi Alpha paraphernalia because he was in that fraternity. And so one day I stayed after school, and I asked him a couple questions about his experience at Prairie View, and he's like, "You thinking about it?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm considering it." And this was my junior year, so he said, "All right, man, in the fall, go to the Labor Day Classic, which is Prairie View against Texas Southern University, and when you go, just let me know what you think. Come back and let's chat." And so I went. At the time, I'm hardcore jazzer. I align a lot more to the jazz ensemble than I did any other ensemble of the traditional aspect of band. And the bands were battling in the stands. And Prairie View played first. They played all blues from Miles Davis in the stands, and then TSU responded, I think, with Liberian Girl from Michael Jackson, and then PV responded with Giant Steps, and I was just floored because they did it at halftime and then double time, and I was like, "Yep, that's the school. There it is." And so I made my decision then. There were a lot of people within my network, my community, my mentors that were somewhat openly discouraging me from going there because, like I said, I could have gone into Rice, I couldn't gotten to A&M, I could have gone into the big, name schools, but I just said no. I want to teach there. I mean, I want to go there because I want to learn that style. So when I come back, I have both core style and HBCU style experience and show style and traditional style, so I can be this wide range band director and come back to my setting and implement both styles. So I kind of had that mindset of like, I want to be a part of that type of band. And I was destined to it. And nobody could stop me from doing that. And once I graduated, those people that were not in agreement with me going to an HBCU walked their statements backwards and apologize and acknowledge how great of an opportunity and experience that it gave me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talked to Justin about this. I taught for a year at Florida A&M University in HBCU. It was a terrific year of teaching. What was the experience like for you as a Latino student going into an HBCU, and what did it give you as far as your education?
So I have to acknowledge, I think I was one out of two, I think, and actually, I think he's mixed. I think he's half Latinos in the marching band when I joined. Everybody else was Black, and I think we had two white students. Now, in high school, I had friends of all backgrounds, but one thing that I did align to was the hip hop culture, and I idolize the hip hop artists of Houston, which are known as screw artists like Swisher House and DJ Screw. Those were like my idols. I literally bought every CD. And so I literally idolized this hip hop and urban culture. So when I went there, it was what's the only kind of negative thing that I can say is that when I walked in, some of my peers assumed that I dressed like a cholo, like from East LA, like a gangster. Like if I wore gangster Nikes and some Dickies and I was like, yeah, I don't talk like that, nor do I, I was like, and so when people realized that, I was very strong in my identity. And so I actually helped and educated a lot of my friends to understand the Latino culture a little bit more. But ultimately, what I did and allowed myself to do was to be present to the HBCU culture, which was, and still to this day, and hence why I'm working there again, is something that I will never forget. And honestly, I don't know if it's necessarily present at higher institutions. And one thing that comes to mind is the accessibility of professors. Is not having to set an appointment. At times you can literally go walk and knock on the door and have a life lesson, which I did on many times with my professors. And just earlier today, there are three that made a huge impact on my life: Dr. Selden, Dr. Cornelius, and Dr. Taylor. And anytime that I get, when I got my first sweepstakes, all my straight ones at UIL, I sent them a text message literally while I'm still on the bus. Today, when I got the opportunity to go serve on a diversity and equity and inclusion committee, I texted all three of them and I said, I hear your teachings and your voice in my statements. Thank you. And I never forget those experiences. And then on top of that, they gave me some financial support that I would not be a band director today if I hadn't received it from them. So what I can say is ultimately, if you allow yourself to, because I remember the number, there were 303 total Latino students in the entire university, and many of which were commuter students or in the graduate programs. So it was almost, we were anomalies. You'd walk down the campus and be like, hey, and we'd kind of shout each other out and be like, who are you? And then so, unbeknownst to me, I joined the Latino-based fraternity on campus. So I found some community within that, even though we have diverse membership. But I can tell you from the hump day parties where all the fraternities and sororities are in front of a DJ on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock after lunch, to the lake parties, to the battle of the bands, to, I mean, you name it, just everything about it I absolutely loved. And then the other part is having so many professors of color, and just that model and that representation, it just inspired me to want to become one of those.
So, Eric, I want to talk specifically about the marching band and the HBCU. You mentioned the show style, and we know the core style. Can you talk a little bit more about the show style and the elements of it at the HBCU?
For sure. So, let's we gotta, and I gotta acknowledge that a lot of people do use show style, where a lot of HBCU directors you will hear from say that it's traditional style, and the traditional style definition comes from the Bill Moffitt way of doing drill. And the reason I'm a little bit more well versed on that right now, I'm actually in a Pieware course with the director of bands at Prairie View right now, where he's teaching us the ins and outs of Pieware, but he's not limiting us to just the Bill Moffitt style. And so what we've had to do is like recreate a drill with the Bill Moffitt design style, just from watching a YouTube video and doing it from scratch. I think this week's is recreating a DCI video to the best of our ability. So I say that because the traditional style stems actually from the Big Ten influence, where a lot of these HBCU alumni were going up north to get their graduate degree and then coming back and serving within a lot of these HBCU programs. And so the lineage of like Dr. Foster at Florida A&M University is so widespread because the founder of the Marching Storm, when Professor George Edwards came from Florida A&M, he came from that model, and our uniform, honestly, is a similar representation of Florida A&M's uniform. And so what did Prof. Ed do? He went to Michigan as well to get his graduate degree. And so a lot of these pioneers within the HBCU band culture and programs, all of them, if not majority of them, went up north to get some type of graduate degree after receiving a degree in the South. And then they came back and brought those teachings with them. And so what Foster did was implement this, okay, I'm taking that model, but I'm going to use relevant music to my drills and relevant music to my community. And so he started putting Prince, he started putting pop and hip hop and funk music to these drills that would speak more to the community. And so that's kind of what's been happening and still continues to happen. And I'm really honored and privileged to work with Dr. Zach, where he has this kind of culmination of all of those styles and experiences. He got his doctorate at IU in trumpet performance. And so he's bringing in this wide range of experiences after Navy bandsman. And so those of you that might not be exposed to it, yeah, you can go and watch Drumline, but I would say there's enough videos and YouTube access to see one in person, or Honda Battle of the Bands when we had it. And so we deal with this high knee lift, pointed toe, sometimes a horn swing, and we play with a lot more energy. And so I use the term energy versus loud because a lot of people have used different terms and coded terms to talk about our style of band, when it really is about just playing with more energy. And so it's more focused on the quick and immediate product, because sometimes you can, like Prairie View did this last year. They did a field show on a Friday night and went out to a Battle of the Bands the Saturday and did a completely different field show. Where that, and when people ask me, they're like, are they going to do the one from last night? And then we're sitting there, I was like, nope, their setup is different. Here's another one. And so it's different. But what's great about it is that experience. And, given that I have experience at predominantly white institutions and HBCUs, more often than not, I hear at PWIs, my colleagues say like, "Ugh, I did my 2 years and then I was done." Where you'll find it at an HBCU, they'll try to march as long as they can, and that goes to the environment and just the experience, and it speaks to people not wanting to leave that because it's so profound and a big part of their identity. But one thing that we do stress at Prairie View is that they're there to get a degree, and so this is just part of their process.
Yeah, no, I did my 2 years and I was done.
Yeah, exactly.
So marching band has never been a big part of my profile. I didn't particularly care for it. I liked the camaraderie in high school, but I didn't particularly care for it in college. And then when I had my first high school teaching job, it was at a private school, and we just had a stand band. We never had to get on the field. So I never had to really teach marching band. So excuse me if I just don't know a whole lot about it. It's not in my wheelhouse. So the Big Ten also does kind of a modified show style, or it's similar, right?
I mean, that's where it comes from.
Right.
I mean,
That's
you look
what I
at
thought.
Ohio
Yeah.
State, you look at Penn State, you look at the drum majors, they still carry that all that aspect of what it means, and it just transformed to make it more distinct for each HBCU band program because, Florida A&M has a certain way that they lift up their legs and point their toe down, while we do the same thing with a slight swing. But a lot of what we do is facing the stands versus the Bill Moffitt style, where you might be facing the end zones. And so it's just a variation of those things that even through drill design creates that identity of those HBCU band programs. But yeah, it's reflective in what they do, especially at those very historic Big Ten schools.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't want to make a fool of myself in front of the band community here.
Right.
But yeah, especially like the drum major tradition in the HBCU.
Yep. Yeah, that's huge. We have 5 drum majors and we call them Category 5, since we're the marching storm, and you just have to be on point, and especially with the huge influence of social media and YouTube videographers now. You can't make a mistake. Literally, you can't, because all eyes are on you from the time we get off the bus to the time we march back, and everything in the middle. And so there's a huge amount of pressure to always be performing.
There's a terrific video on YouTube. Is it the Norfolk Southern?
Yeah, it's Norfolk State. Yeah,
Norfolk State, where they're coming back from the game.
It was actually an indoor battle. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I get exhausted when I watch that video.
Yeah, I'll give them their props. There's a lot of rivalry in that. But my Dr. Zach actually did serve as the associate director of bands, assistant director back in the day at Norfolk State. That's where he came from. And so, but yeah, I got to see that video, and I got to give them their props. That was an outstanding entrance.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of competition, of course, and there is, the competition, but at the end of the day, it's still a community.
Amen. Yeah, I'm with that, because I think, and that's something I'm trying to stress, especially within my community, within the Houston area and the state of Texas, is once we become educators, let's put that aside and let's help these kids. It's fun. It's some could say it's healthy, but when we're outside of that, like, what benefit does it have to be still be with that rivalry when it carries no weight and no substance?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, Eric.
No, you're good.
I'm wondering, we're going to talk about competition because it's one of the questions I always ask every guest, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't be, it's so hard because it's such a tradition. That rivalry is such a tradition, right?
Yep.
But yet, how do we keep the rivalry, but yet make sure it remains respectful and healthy, I guess?
It comes from the top. It's what your directors model. It's what your directors say on the stand. It's what your directors say in informal conversations that students will follow. And that's the best example, is to lead by example. And so if the directors are talking smack, then the students are going to talk smack. And unfortunately, we also have what we call these YouTube band directors that marched in the band but never got a music degree or dropped out, and they just feel like they've earned their right to criticize, and then they're usually the ones that are bringing things up and stirring the pot a little bit. But that's something that I try to stress, is like, I was so honored that several TSU, Texas Southern University students went to my session at TMEA, and they came up and introduced themselves to me, and that's exactly that's awesome. You know what I mean? And I acknowledge every single one of them, and I thank them for being there, because that's like I'm a band director, and when we see each other in the stands, like yeah, it's game time, but at the end of the day, like if y'all are trying to be music educators and I can help in your journey, by all means, let's do it, and let's bring people together and find some solutions.
All right, so we are very slowly winding our way through your career here, Eric. I keep getting us off track. So last we were talking about your time at Prairie View A&amp, and so how about your first job and out of there, and what was that like, and what kind of school was that?
I have to credit my first job, which was actually the summer before my student teaching semester. I was already living in the Houston area, because Prairie View is about 45 to 50 minutes away from this actual downtown Houston. And so I had moved back already because I was going to student teach in the area. And I was looking for a summer job, even though I was DJing. I just wanted to have some type of consistent income. And I had gotten approved to, I think, be like a youth camp medical director, something of within the medicine field. And I was going to make, I think, close to like $18 an hour at that job. But then I got a friend to share my resume with the Fine Arts supervisor for Project Grad, which is a nonprofit organization in the Houston area that helped lower income kids create a pathway to a higher education. And they provided them with a scholarship if they were in it all 4 years. But they implemented this fine arts organization in a branch from that. And I interviewed with them. And to my surprise, I got the job, but they're like, "Oh yeah, we forgot to mention it's not paid." And I was like, "Oh, what? What?" And I'm thinking like, I got to pay bills. And so I was like, "Can I give y'all an answer tomorrow?" And so I went home and I just kind of asked family. I was like, "Hey, I'm going to put myself in a very vulnerable place right now, and I might need to borrow a couple dollars here and there just for the summer to make ends meet." And and so when I went back and I said, "Yeah, I would like to accept," they offered me minimum wage. So I got to work with a gentleman by the name of Larry Ward in the Houston area. And I was working with predominantly second through fifth grade elementary school students. And it was in my neighborhood, like where I was raised and grew up in. And so I walk in, and I'll never forget this experience. This man told a young lady who was a fourth grader clarinet player and said, "Go ahead and play your B flat scale." And D, 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 and she just ripped it. And I was like, "What?" And I made a face like of obviously of acknowledgement and surprise. And he's like, "No, no, no. I need you to do X, Y, and Z, this note right here. Make sure that when you tongue, and go ahead and do it again and rip it 2 octaves this time." And she did. And my face was just like, "What?" And that lunch, he taught me so much. That was like my first day. And he said, "Hey, you realize that, you gave a reaction to that student?" I said, "Yeah, of course. That was outstanding. I know high school students. I know some college students that can't do that." He said, "Yeah, try not to do that though, because they don't know what good is. So take them there." And I was like, and that was just a huge lesson for me, because I saw him do that to so many of his students, and they were playing grade 2 music by their 5th grade year at almost at a flawless level, because he would take them to the local band festival, and the judges, and which I saw on more than one occasion, gave them a 1+ because it was such a great display of musicianship. And these were all kids from lower income settings and predominantly Latino. And so that was my first unofficial job. And the day that the sponsors and potential grant people were going to come in from organizations and businesses, he allowed me to conduct. And at the time, there was a fine arts director for the Houston Independent School District, and she asked him, "Who's that?" He said, "Well, he's a college student at Prairie View, and he's looking for a job come January." And said, "Well, tell him to send me his resume." And so she gave me my first job. That was at Sharpstown Middle School in the southwest area of Houston, and that was an experience in itself, and quite honestly, a culture shock for me, because I'm from the north side of Houston, and the southwest side has a much more dense population of Central Americans. And honestly, gangs were way more prevalent there than they were in my neighborhood. So like in my side of town, people were representing their neighborhoods, where down there, they were claiming their gangs. And so I had students that were Bloods, Somos Pocos Pero Locos, MS-13. I mean, there was several. And I worked there for a semester, because at the end of the year, they were switching it over to a charter school. And I didn't want to take away membership from my friend who was at the local high school. But I'll never forget, man. I gotta say about that experience, which I don't know if I've really talked about it, to be honest. So I was that guy that would show up early and stay late. Then I started realizing some of the issues that my students had, and that was, yeah, I have the instrument inventory, but they can't take these home. Nor do they have the space at home to practice. A lot of them lived in apartments with several people in their family, and so I created solutions. I was like, okay, y'all can come during lunch. I went to go get approval from administration. Come during lunch, and you can use the space to practice either before school, during lunch, or after school. I'll make it available. Use it. And one of those days, one of my kids decided to tag up blood in one of my practice rooms, really big. And so the next day, I addressed it and I said, "Who did it?" And we all knew that my black students were the Bloods, and so all the Latino students were kind of siding, like, "You know who it is? Like, why are you asking?" And I just flat out said, "I don't know about y'all, but y'all claim to be gangsters." I said, "If y'all were really gangster, you would tell me to my face." And everybody was just quiet. And I said, so because that's not the case, I said, here's what's going to happen. I can't control what's happening outside of the school building, and more specifically, this band hall. So when you come here, this is a safe place. So I expect you to tuck in your red, tuck in your rosaries, do what I ask you to do, and we're going to keep the space safe. I can't control what happens in the streets, but when you come in here, you got to leave that to the side. Sure enough, I had zero issues to the end of the semester. The kids were respecting my decision. They tucked in their stuff. And then, I mean, and what's crazy when I talk about it, it almost seems like something off of Stand and Deliver or Freedom Riders.
Right,
you know what I mean? But I honestly had that experience. And then when people would come, especially administration, to come see how I was handling it, they're like, "How did you do this? You're only here for 2 months." And it's like, so that led me into my journey of who I've become. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because one of my students actually is a music professional. He was an 8th grader there. He did some music in college, but he's gigging, he's doing it, he's living a great life. I'm still in touch with a lot of those kids. They've added me on social media. They've graduated from college or whatnot, or living fruitful lives. But that was my first experience. I went off to teach at my old middle school, Hamilton Middle School, with Balaji Siwa and Justin McLean. And then from there, now what you're going to hear from me in my story, it sounds like I jumped around a lot, in which I did, but when I was intentional. I was going into spaces like Sharpstown Middle School didn't have a band. I failed to mention that. I started it from scratch. I had 0 students, and they gave me the first 2 weeks of the semester to go walk around homerooms and just recruit. And so I was like, "You want to do something with your life? Sure, come on." And so I did that. Hamilton Middle School, their band program had gone down tremendously. I think there were maybe active like 75 students. After my second year there, we had 225. From there, I got the opportunity to go serve at Waltrip High School with my former high school band director, Jesse Espinosa. And the year that we went to go to the inauguration, the ball for Obama. And from there, I took a job as a director of bands at Davis High School, now known as Northside High School. I did Friday before my first day of school. I had about 14 to 18 students, and I had a full-time assistant band director. So in my mind, I was like, how am I even going to validate having an assistant? First game on that Thursday, I had 77 kids on the field. By the time I left that program, I left it with 110. And I was able to increase inventory participation and develop the comprehensive band program, winning a first division at concert sight reading UIO. From there, I had a little life crisis, and I wanted to get out of the band hall. And I had an administration degree already by that point. And so I chose to become an administrator for a year in lieu of hopefully being in a fine arts, some type of fine arts administrator in the district level one day, kind of looking at that as a peg point, if you will. And so I did that for a year. I have been told I did a phenomenal job as an administrator, but I didn't like it. I honestly didn't like it. I was 1 week away from presenting my final business plan to State Farm. I was going to be a State Farm agent. That's how much I was just done with education. I'm glad I didn't. My wife gave me a little coming to Jesus talk, and I went back into the band hall, and I got a high school band director position at Heights High School, and I served that program for 3 years. When I got it, it's a 6A band program, and I only had 56 returning students. When I left it, we had just gone to area marching concerts for the first time, 165 students. We had 4 concert bands, 2 big bands, a percussion ensemble that was competing in TCGC in the circuit, and an award-winning color guard and an award-winning mariachi. And so I said all that. That's kind of been my mission because every space that I went to, I literally ran towards programs that were on the brink of extinction or didn't exist at all. And and I worked those programs up. Then additionally, another thing that I was intentional about was every one of my assistants usually came from Prairie View. So I was one of that guy that would call my professors and say, "Who's the next one out? Send me student teachers. Send me the next one to work with me." And then when I left that school, I left it to my assistant. So like Justin became the director of bands at Hamilton when I left. And at Northside High School at Davis, Timothy Richardson, he went to Prairie View with me. He's the director of bands there now. And then same thing at Heights. The director of bands is not from Prairie View, but the assistant that got Justin's job is from Prairie View. So it's just I've been intentional about creating these spaces and these opportunities for HBCU alumni, and specifically Prairie View because that's home. Because I started seeing the lack of opportunity that was given to us just because of the school we went to.
Yeah, there's a lot in there that's really interesting to me as I listen to your story. I like your statement that you ran to programs that needed you. I don't know. Do you ascribe at all to the theory that people are either builders or maintainers?
I do, and I obviously I'm a builder, man. I go into those spaces and I was like, and you know, it's funny because I view houses the same way. Because I'm actually in the option period of selling my home right now, and the house we're gonna build, one would walk in and especially the way people are buying houses now, they want it to be turnkey and not have to do any work. Where I've always seen houses like I walk in and see this could be, and so I walk in with that half glass full mindset of saying like, cool, this is where it's at now. All right, we can only go up from here, you know. And so I definitely operated with that mindset in every single one of the programs that I worked with. Is like, okay, it's here. How can I make it better? Like during my time here, and I can attribute that to one of my mentors in college, where he said, "What's going to be your legacy when you leave?"
Yeah, I really feel that. I got to tell you, Eric, the longest I've ever been in one job was 8 years. And my first high school teaching gig, I walked into it was a 7 through 12 boys Catholic school. And I walked into band camp the first day, and there had been like a part-time guy once a week teaching some lessons, but there hadn't really been a band there since the 60s. And so I walk in, before my band camp, quote unquote, we're not doing marching. So it's really just a chance for me to meet the students and to start learning music. And there's like this old sousaphone, like from like 1965, a red bass drum, and then a bunch of moldy stuff that I had to throw away. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing, no music, nothing. And I walk in the band camp. So I ordered some music quick. I did some arrangements, some goofy stuff. And band camp the first day, I had 12 kids, and like 6 of them played the saxophone.
Just get the sweat sax choir going.
Yeah. And so the first thing I did that afternoon is I went to my principal and I said, I'm going to go and send make a phone call to the girls' school across the street. Can they come over and take band in the morning? And so the next day I had 6 freshman girls join the band, got up to 18. First day of school, word got out, I had 25 kids that first year.
Nice.
When I left 4 years later, I had 83 kids in the program, a junior high band, a high school band, a jazz band, and 2 guitar classes.
Love it.
In a school of only like 600. So, it's why I took the job I'm in now. And now I know my principal's listening. I may cut this out. Cheryl, I love my job. But once I build it up, I'm gonna get uncomfortable again.
I'm with you, because I think that's where I don't like to be put. There's no cap to what I'm capable of doing for others, And I think once you limit that, that's where I do encourage some educators that I help. Like, okay, do you feel like you can get more out of this? And it's like, yeah, I can. Okay, then it might be time, But it was, I had to put in almost 10 years for my name to start getting recognized in the Houston area, where a fine arts director flat out told me, he's like, Eric, you do realize that everybody, like anybody right now, would give you a job. And I was like, what? And it's like, we saw what you did. Like, you took programs that never had that, and you went and became one of the top programs in the city. And I was like, oh, well, sure.
My dream, and I don't know if it'll ever happen because my wife is, tenured, full professor. We're not digging out unless someone offers her a job at a bigger place, is I'd love to take a job at a junior college where I could have the band, teach theory, and build that band into something special.
That's awesome.
That would be my dream.
Who comes to mind? And I'm going to mention him when you ask him, but Dr. Abel Ramirez, who's at Del Mar Community College in Corpus Christi. And I think he was teaching at some California university. And then I think he was at IU. I mean, he was at these big schools, and I'm like, where did you, which I want to reach out to him, but he comes to mind because it says on there, he's the associate professor of music and the director of instrumental ensembles.
So, Eric, what was the decision to go and get your doctorate? And now your doctorate is in education or conducting?
So it's a music education with a cognate in wind conducting. So what I can say, it was there was an event that served as a catalyst in 2016, the summer before I decided to go back into the band hall. Which was great. Like, even I was sitting at this TMEA organized this urban music summer dialogue and brought in urban music educators from across the state, from El Paso, from the Valley to Amarillo, and all across the state, from every discipline, from elementary to collegiate. And we spent 2.5 days actually, in this intense conversation, because at the time, the TMEA president, Dinah Menger, was really, really wanting to increase visibility, representation, and just dig into what do we do well, and maybe share it with others. And so she started this conversation that was surrounded by Dr. Kate Fitzpatrick's book of urban music education. And so I'm sitting there and I'm in great company. I'm talking to people that are doing similar things as me, or are doing things differently than me. And I picked up some ideas from them. A choral colleague told me about a short and sweet concert. And I was like, what? And he said, at the very beginning, I literally have all these parents donate all these sweets and, sweet bread to cupcakes to cookies. And we do a short and sweet concert, meaning they can purchase those desserts. And then I use it as my first band parent meeting, or my first meeting to talk to parents. And I was like, how great of an idea, So I was in great company. But the thing that really, really stuck with me is there was the college division chair was there at the time. And he was asking, and I was picking up on this. He was asking all of us, and he was taking notes. And so he was pretty much asking the question, like, how do I tell my white middle class, upper middle class students on how to go teach in an urban setting? And so then I asked him the question. I said, obviously I get that, and that question needs to be answered. But let me ask you this: how would I adapt to teaching in an affluent suburban area, being a product? And he was like, I don't know how to answer that. And so I started getting interested into, okay, then who is answering these questions at the collegiate level? And so I had this ongoing, challenge with my father, because he has a master's in social work. He and I have always teased about who's going to get the doctorate first. And we would be the first in our entire family lineage to receive this doctorate. And so part of that is, so that event served as a catalyst that exposed to me this literature that was happening and research of urban music education. But then it also inspired me, because I was like, people that look like me, sound like me, and products of this environment are not usually the ones contributing to that conversation. And so I wanted to be that. And I kind of want to be like, you know what? I wanted to be one that starts sharing those stories of success, because I knew of them. And I just think they never were documented. Nobody did a case study on them. And then we all know so many people that have served faithfully in these urban and lower income settings, and they just retire, and we just know about them through word of mouth. Nobody documented their experience. Nobody put it into black and white, into some type of tangible document or even book to share with so many others for years to come. And so so it's coupled with recognizing the absence and the lack. And then at the same time, it's a personal family goal that I've told my wife that I value having this doctorate and the DR in front of my name to provide the image and the representation within my own family to say, anybody after me can do it too.
I want to talk about what you just said about representation, because, one of the things that maybe people don't think about so much is the Latinx community is very underrepresented in the band community. And you and I had a conversation about this, and you gave me a percentage. Can we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you just go to your conventions and you can see it. You know what I mean? Like, it's, you can go to conventions, you can see it with performing groups, you can hear it. I mean, so the number of Latino property, let me start off with the teachers. Um, ELPIS did a study that acknowledged that 86% of teachers seeking a music licensure were white, and only 1.94% were Latino, or self-identified as a Latino, where that number of participation is higher in our secondary music ensembles, but yet still very huge in disparity, reflecting the just the overall population of Latino students being the largest and the fastest growing subgroup of any student population in the country. But we're not seeing that representation and even just participation. And we can't even get students to become educators or music educators if they're not even involved in the activity. And then the barriers that exist even past that, we could talk about admissions into schools of music and not knowing the protocol, the standard rep, the process, not knowing that you have to apply to your university and to the school of music. And then just there's all these factors that contribute to these barriers that exist that I hopefully will start addressing throughout my career. So that in itself allowed for me, and that I think that's a big reason why I attached to jazz bands so much, because I saw more musicians and overall composers of color that I aligned a lot more to those sounds than I did of the traditional band sound. And so I was always that kid, history textbook. Okay, why is there only one paragraph on Latino American history, and it always talked about Cesar Chavez and Lulac? And so I would always ask those questions. I would be the guy, hey, can you tell me more about this? Well, that's all I know. It's like, okay, thanks. And I learned more about my American Latino history from local historians that, introduced me to people. So I was always that kid. So, when I had this love for cumbia, I found out the origin of it. If I went norteño, then I want to go find the origin of it. I just found things out on my own. So when I entered this space and I started seeing the lack of representation, specifically of Latino band directors, I always had this issue with my development of my identity as a band director. I knew I had to work twice as hard to develop that, especially because I came from an HBCU and I was a Latino. So I knew I had this assumption that I walked into, conferences and everybody looked at me and said, "Oh, you teach mariachi." And here's the crazy part. I always wanted to, and I just chose not to because I knew that would further alienate me from being able to create that comprehensive band director identity that I know I could do too. So I worked really hard to do that. And so now now that I'm in this space, I want to create the, future music educator. That's essentially what my degree is going to be about. And so I want to be able to have that impact and that, I guess you could say, just interject a little bit into their life that hopefully it can trickle on to so many generations of future musicians from that point on.
Justin and I talked about representation on the podium. Do you think that's part of the problem? Or, I don't want to speculate. That's not really a fair place. Let me ask that again. Do you think there's solutions we can come up with to create to encourage more Latinx students to enter music education? Or
so for sure, if we want to talk about just representation and the fact of who's in front of them, then you can start with your invited guest clinicians and the people who make those decisions, and being intentional about saying, hey, let's get somebody that looks like our kids. Let's get somebody that would represent this community or this culture. But more often than not, we're not getting those invitations, unless you've kind of earned your stripes within that in crowd, and figured out a way to do that. And so that's a first step. You know what I mean? Not even first step. That's just one component of it, because like I said, are you even attracting Latino students to your music program? And so it doesn't even matter to have a conductor in front of them if they can't even, if they don't even have the opportunity to see that conductor, if they're not even in your ensemble. But yes, I'm all for that, because those moments that I have seen a Latino or Latina on a podium speaks volumes to me. Because I did the same thing through my exposure of LULAC, where I met lawyers, doctors, civil rights activists. I met the first Latino police officer in Houston, the first firefighter Latino in Houston. And every time I came up and met these people, they would speak, and I was like, but y'all grew up in the suburbs, or you don't know my life. I always had this chip on my shoulder, like. And then when they would tell me, like, no, I'm from Magnolia, or I'm from the same neighborhood you're from, and my parents are from Mexico, and I was like, wait, what? And so I started seeing myself in them. And I always challenge even college panels that would come to my high school where it was all white panel. And I'm like, so you're telling me to go to Brown? Cool. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And I would always shut down because I had this like chip on my shoulder, just saying like, you don't know my life. I don't see myself in you. So this self concept cannot be developed if I don't have that imagery, if I don't have that representation. Not to say that it can happen, but that's just, I personally feel, because of my lived experiences, those moments in my life allowed me to say, hey, you know what? You can go be a lawyer. You can go be a doctor. You can go be a firefighter, a policeman, because I was provided that example where a lot of my family were blue collar and working manual labor jobs.
So, Eric, I just realized, and you just reminded me that I haven't asked you about where you're teaching right now. And I mentioned that you're teaching at your alma mater. You want to talk about your current gig?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm blessed, man. To come back home. I am currently serving as the assistant director of bands at Prairie View A&amp University. I am overall, I'm director of the top jazz ensemble there, and I assist with the marching storm, with the marching band aspects. And then I do some adjunct work for some of the courses that are being taught there. But the majority of my work is actually helping out with the instrumental ensembles there. And I have to shout out my professors and the band staff and my colleagues there. It's a family in its own, and I absolutely love working with them. On top of that, given that I'm finishing up my doctorate in music education at the University of Houston, so I'm also serving as a graduate teaching assistant there with three of my professors, Dr. Mills, Dr. Aaron Hansen, and Dr. Julie Durges. And so I get to work with all three of them, and then this fall I'll be working with the bands as well. So it's two locations, but my faculty position is at Prairie View A&amp, the HBCU band program, and I absolutely love working there. There was so much pride that I had of my professors, and I can just only hope to become that person for my students now.
Yeah. So what's the program like? I know the marching band. We talked about the HBCU marching band, but what's the music program overall like at Prairie View A&amp?
So what I can tell you is that, we have, pretty much what you would expect from any university music program. We have the choral ensembles. We actually have two big bands, two concert bands, the Marching Storm. We have individual chamber groups. And then from there, what I love about my students is that they have their own gigs too. They have their own bands. So even my jazz combo that I have, I give a lot more flexibility and freedom to them. Because one thing that I realized this past year, I just kind of asked a question because I caught some of my students with their own music, and they producing their own music. So I just asked in one rehearsal, I was like, how many of y'all dabble with production? And I kid you not, I think only one hand did not go up. So when I saw that, I said, okay, how can I bring in that? Because I think one of the things that I did not know how to do, nor did I feel like it was appropriate for me to say, because I think it lost credibility. I operated with like these two identities. I was the, your traditional school of music kind of kid. I'm doing my studio work. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and pass my classes. And then on the weekends, I'm going down to downtown Houston and I'm DJing at clubs. And so I didn't know how to intersect those two things. I didn't know how to bring in the traditional aspect of music education into my DJing and vice versa. And so I didn't want my students to do that either. If they have a passion for music production, hey, by all means, bring it in, let it influence. And something that I've seen, especially during the pandemic, a lot of my students are recording like original tracks and using their instrument to do it. And they're gigging with bands and they're picking stuff up by ear. And so I was like, cool, I want to be that person that allows that space. And that, especially at the collegiate level, that, that does not continue the rhetoric and that narrative of you have to do classical. And that's what makes you successful as a music educator or a music professional. So that's a big part of it. So, but as any HBCU, the marching band is pretty much almost king. And what I mean by that, it's the most visible. It's a huge marketing and also recruitment organization. And so we're about 350 to 400 members in the band. And so yeah, we're probably topping off as one of the largest HBCUs, especially within the history even of Prairie View's marching band.
So, you talked about the culturally responsive classroom. You want to explain this for those who maybe have been out in the teaching world a little longer than the more recent wave?
For sure. So, culturally responsive classroom was coined by Dr. Lanson Billings, and so what she works towards is including these three components, and one of them is cultural competence. Second is critical consciousness, and then the third is I don't want to say it wrong. I gotta say it right. Let's see. There it is. So the first one is cultural competence, and this is pretty much grounded on being present to one's own culture and obviously being available to others. The second is that of student learning, and the third is that of socio-political. But overall, she transformed that to a critical consciousness of the student. And this is kind of they all carry the same weight. And so this is a culturally responsive pedagogical practice that she coined. Since then, I've gotten into the culturally sustaining practices as well. The two researchers are Alim and Paris. They came out with this term in 2017, and they produced a book on it where Dr. Lanson Billings was actually a part of it as well. And so essentially what the central theme of these practices and this framework is asking people to do is to include the student's culture into the learning process. And it resonated with me so much because I did not hear nor see my home experience in my educational experience, both in curriculum and in sounds, and in people. So it was just kind of like, you come to the United States if you're an immigrant and you assimilate. That's what you do. And you try to not to ruffle feathers as much. And so doing this, I've been, when I finally started digging into this research, I started realizing that some of the things that I or Justin or some of my colleagues did was exactly that. Like we were including their culture and not making it wrong or negative or a deficit. One of the examples is specifically talking about how to get the money for certain things and trying to establish the buy-in, especially for my lower income students, to go tell, like, how are you going to go tell a parent who has no concept or understanding of band, and you're now telling them that you got to rent a trombone every month for $60. And so how do I even begin that conversation? And a friend of mine, Chris Gonzalez, a middle school band director in the area, he taught at a lower income school for several years, and he became, I think, 7th in honor band in the state of Texas. And he told me one day, he's like, yeah, man, you know how we're raised, man. We go out to eat on Sunday after church, and it'd be 6, 7, 8 of us. And Dad, they bring the check over to him. I said, let me tell you something. Has your dad ever actually looked at the receipt? I said, nah, man, he just puts the cash down or he puts his card down and it gets paid. He's like, yeah, my dad does the same thing. And so what I present to my parents sometimes is saying, okay, how many of y'all go to eat, at least once, twice, maybe, once a month, maybe. And then several hands go up, even if from the lower income community. And they're like, okay, cool. Okay, this instrument rental is going to be one of those dinners. And it just hit. It was kind of like even that practice is of culturally relevance, The other one that I brought up was of how we as a Latino community bring up sponsors or padrinos to create quinceañeras and even weddings. Like we reach out to our immediate and extended family and friends and ask for them to contribute to our celebration. And it's not taboo. That's not frowned upon. Nobody talks about it. It's like, and actually people want to be included. Like I'll be the sponsor of the DJ. I'll be the sponsor of the mariachi. And so I've brought that in. I was like, okay, how come we can come up? And I was like, and I'm not against it. I was like, but how can y'all come up with $15, $20, $25, $30,000 for a quinceañera, but you can't come up with, 100 for X, Y, and Z, or to pay for a band trip that you'll never forget? So I use those concepts, and I was like, I would implore that you use that tactic because it's open as a cultural tendency to bring that in. And these are all external things that I used to influence the educational process. Now, while I'm in that, then I threw in, it's as easy as, like, let's say you're a marching band director, you're doing a water break. I put on a huapango, a dance tune for my students to dance to while they're on the water break. So I had the speaker, I had the Bluetooth. It's including those sounds to let them know I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you, and then on top of that, I celebrate you. Instead, I have had students that are ashamed or afraid to really talk about or share their cultural identity or their sounds in the school setting. We arranged a Selena song for one of the high schools, and one of my students told me like, "We don't want to play that," and I was like, Why? They're gonna make fun of us. That I was like, wait a minute, do y'all dance to this at a quinceañera? Well, yeah. What about the barbecue? Yeah. What about weddings? Yeah. Then why are you so ashamed to do it in the school setting? Now, this is high school, so that tells me that their educational experience somewhere something happened that suppressed their cultural identity in that aspect. So I'm really big on using students' culture to enhance the learning process, to allow them to see the value and the beauty in who they are and where they come from, and let that influence and enhance the educational process. And Lansing Billings, she's the one that kind of says like, okay, if a student is of non-white culture, then the other culture she promotes, you have to teach them at least one other culture, and that one other culture might be the white dominant one. And he said, and then vice versa. If your white students think they don't have a culture, then you need to expose them to at least one other culture that's non-white, where the sustaining practice is including more of the linguistic aspect of who they are. And that could be colloquialism, that could be vernacular that's specific to who they are and how they speak. And that goes into lending into code switching, and knowing how to fit the part in certain areas in the conversation.
Can you share one or two entry points for someone who might be more interested in creating a more culturally responsive classroom?
For sure. I think a lot of people gravitate towards the notion of having to create a separate ensemble, which is difficult to do, even if you're struggling to do the whatever main ensemble you're tasked to do. But the first one to do is I advocate to inform yourself with data. And as our school officials always do, and so one of the things that you can do from the very beginning, if you don't know your students, is a way to survey them and in a way to know about the sounds that are reflective in their home. And that's as easy of asking in the survey, list your favorite song, list your mom's favorite song, your dad's favorite song, pick 5 people in your life that are important to you and list their favorite song and why. And then you kind of start getting this resource and soundtrack of their life. And that can influence some of your programming decisions. That could be, I have more sounds of the African American diaspora. How can I include more of that? How can I, like I did an assignment with one of my elective courses that we have at Prairie View, the non-music major kind of survey courses. And one of their assignments was to allow me, and part of it was selfish too, because I literally want to get to know my students, even at the collegiate level. And this was a 40-person class. And what I asked them to do was that question about pick 5 important people in your life, pick their 5 favorite songs and why, or if I went to a family event, whether that be within the Latino community, a quinceañera, a wedding, some major event, what 5 songs would I hear no matter what and why, and explain it to me. And I think 90% picked Frankie Beverly and Maze. But then from there, it was just kind of like so many, individual experiences, and they spoke so much life about each individual song. And so just knowing that could help influence your programming. Because I am not advocating one, if you haven't even programmed anybody that's not white, then start, that's the first step. But I've always seen the tokenism happen. Like, okay, it's Black History Month. Let's do the Black composer songs of Black History Month. It's Hispanic or Latino Hispanic Heritage Month. Then let's do in there. Cinco de Mayo, let's do La Cucaracha. And it's like, no, good Lord, And so I advocate the just overall the embeddedness, but the first step would be to survey your students. Now, if you have established relationships, don't do the pen and paper or the Google form. Find out, have those informal conversations with your kids. Make that a part of your daily interaction with your students and getting to know who they are, because even then that could help within the informal actions, which actually our latest episode on the score talked about. That is, what message are we sending our students in those informal spaces that tells them, or do we appreciate them for who they are or not?
Mm-hmm. I tell you, I have so many terrific opportunities to do this teaching at a Jewish school as a non-Jew. It's amazing how easy it is for me to get those kids engaged in my Jewish learning. Like as I ask them, so tell me about, Hanukkah, tell me about the dreidel. How do we play? You know what I mean? And getting them involved in that. And it really makes a difference to them.
And I think that's another one where we need to not look at them as empty, like they cannot, they already operate with funds of knowledge. And that's been coined by several researchers. They're walking in with lived experiences, with sounds. And something that comes to mind is like, that cheat sheet of intervals, like the minor second is Jaws, and even just the fourth or the inverted fifth. For me, if somebody had just told me when a mariachi song usually ends, that's the sound. Bum ba ba da ba dum, bum bum. Like if somebody had just told me that, but I'm over here singing the wedding march for the fourth. You know what I mean? And so this even within those small things is including people's culture and with their lived experiences and the sounds that they've already been developed with it, and as early as in the womb, and using that to enhance the learning process.
So, Eric, what would you say to someone who, does a survey of the students, but they don't have a really good knowledge of hip hop or Latino music, and they want to be authentic with their students? What's the best way to go about that without kind of, creating fake imitations or using music that's not culturally sensitive?
So the first step is acknowledging, that you don't. I had some college students come up to me after one of my sessions at TMEA and asked me that specific question. They're like, "Sir, we are pasty white," and I try to not laugh, and I was just like, so they were smiling, and I was like, "Okay, cool, man." So like, where do we start, man? Like, how do we as white men try to do this? Because we want to, like, we legit see the value in doing that, but we don't want to seem like we're appropriating. And I told them the exact same thing. It was like, hey, y'all are asking the best question. And that's the first one, is that. The next is that you might have to allow yourself to deprogram on ways that you think or assume that that's the only way or the way to learn music, and allow for that to happen. So it could be that the authentic aspect of learning this tradition, this genre, does not mirror that of a classical diaspora. And I can tell you, specifically speaking about banda music, that's a lot more prevalent in California, but has gained so much traction throughout the United States, and especially here in the state of Texas, where I saw a Compton high school band, replicating, I think it was Zacatecas, if not another famous banda song, and the marching band did it as their halftime show. So that, so it could be arrangements if you're doing a band director stuff, you know what I mean? And allowing, and here's the thing, I think it's a scary part for a lot of teachers. Let them teach it. If they have family members in the community, go through the process and get them certified to attend your school or visit. Allow them to come in and have these authentic experiences, interactions with local musicians. It could be a hip hop producer coming in and kids who are already messing around with production, and you provide a space, a listening party, or even with, something that I've been wanting to do, and I probably would have done it closer to my last years at Heights, was to be able to, like, intermissions between ensembles is to play our students' productions if they're music producers or they're creating their own music. We did allow students to perform their own compositions. I think we had a percussion student do that. It's about creating these spaces. But the first question is to do that. And then there's enough, whether you want to use the term culture bearers or people who know how to do this authentically, and it's a matter of you reaching out. You're not going to find them most likely at your traditional school of music. It could be the spaces that we've created virtually, which I absolutely love, that you can go on Facebook and type in hip hop music ed. That's not coined, but used a lot by Jared Shield from Berkeley School of Music, and I believe Adam Cruz. Those two guys are phenomenal, and there's resources out there, and there's curriculum already developed. It's about you being willing to reach out and getting those questions. I would not, tell your kid who's trying to rap to now start teaching the class, because, it could be as simple as, because I used to try to dabble in some hip hop and rap myself. A friend of mine, we were in band together, and I'll never forget this. And he credits me to this day. So shout out to my friend there. So Ursel, when we were freshmen in high school, we were both in the saxophone section. He was trying to record, and I was dabbling a little bit in writing down some lyrics and stuff. And he was just writing and writing and writing. And I was like, hey, dude, you're not going to put them into bars? And he's like, huh? I said, well, yeah, man, you can't just freestyle. There's a structure to hip hop songs. He's like, oh, what do you mean? I was like, dude, it's 16 measures. Like, that's why they talk about spit of 16. And he's like, what? I didn't know that, And so me teaching them that allowed him to structure a typical pop or hip hop song into a songwriting form, which allowed him now, which he still records, and he's actually a decent hip hop artist here in the Houston area, EDF. I got to give him a shout out. So all that to say, it's because I know what's hard about that is we feel comfortable teaching what we know. And we go through college, and especially through this traditional aspect of doing music in the United States, whether it be band, orchestra, or choir, then we get, our experiences, and then our college experience fuel that to say, I feel confident in this because I was, immersed in this, but I love hip hop, but where do I even start? And I think the conversations are happening now. And I love the universities that are allowing for commercial music or music business or music production to happen with traditional music degrees as well, and not taking away of that aspect. Because what would it look like to teach a student who's going to be a private lesson teacher how to properly market themselves in a business aspect? All these things that intertwine. But I would really recommend some of our university to start including some of the curriculum that will allow for more of even a general music approach that might happen for some of our music educators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no doubt that there's a disconnect between the traditional way that music is taught with the classical canon, the white male canon, and the popular music world. And throughout my career, I told this to Justin too, I'm a composer. I pull in plenty of pop references in my music just because it's part of who I am, but yet I struggle to articulate that in an academic setting.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I was never I never had that background. Now, that's not to blame my professors. It's just sort of like one of those coincidences of how I went through school. And it can be a real challenge. And it's something that I certainly feel when I teach.
For sure. And as do I, one that has more experience in hip hop and DJing and stuff, because I am more well-versed with even just the vocabulary and the teaching practices and strategies that of the classical diaspora than I am in establishing somebody how to start to producing or DJing. And so, but I would recommend, if you're wanting to do it, like stick it through. There's studies where this, I think it was Elpis and Abril noted on a white music teacher seeing an increase of her Latino students not participating in her music ensemble. So she started a mariachi program and had no experience on it, but just stuck it through. And she said it was hard, but when she came out on the other side, she was so grateful that she did, because she created another aspect and another avenue for students to be involved. And I think the misconception whenever you create a new ensemble or a different ensemble or a culturally relevant one, it's going to take away from, the traditional programs, where that's often false, that you're starting to recruit students that weren't even involved. So you're just reaching you're expanding your reach of music education to more students in your school.
So I want to give a plug for episode 99 of my show. I had Anthony Barfield, who's a composer and music producer in New York City, for that episode. Anthony is a composer. He studied trombone at Eastman School of Music, and he wrote the Heritage Concerto for my friend DeMondre Thurman, a terrific euphonium concerto. But he's also a hip-hop producer in New York City. And he talks about living between these two worlds, and it's a really interesting conversation. Just want to plug that for my listeners.
And also, because I got sat in the MBDNA, the Minority Band Directors National Association, where DeMondre was actually a guest clinician on that. And he talked about how he was a hip hop head, that the sounds.
He is. Yeah.
Yeah. So love. And it's just so cool that he got to be able to work with somebody like that shared those common themes.
Is there anything problematic that you find in the literature as far as the way the Latinx culture is represented in some of the pieces? I don't want to call people out, but how do we know as educators what is appropriate and what is appropriated?
I think it's you have to know whether the composer was leading with that of appreciation, uh, and acknowledgement and honor. So, for example, La Fiesta Mexicana was, and he, from my understanding, he put in the program notes that these were sounds that he heard in the plaza during his time in Mexico. And so that, to me, that's outstanding. You know what I mean? It's another opportunity now. Would I wish it was somebody of Latino descent or even preferably Mexican descent? Yeah, but that's been a staple within the wind band repertoire that probably was the only piece that I heard during my upbringing that that sounded like anything remotely to home music. Uh, Other than some of the Latin jazz charts, but that even then, Latin jazz has a lot more an Afro-Cuban influence. So even though, like, yeah, Mexicanos, we're gonna dance the salsa and bachata and merengue and stuff, but that's not necessarily derivative from the Mexican culture. So all that to say that when I heard that piece, that was kind of one of the first ones that spoke to me. So I think because so that's one example. But then you go the other way, where I was at a conference. I walked into one of those new music reading bands where directors sit in and promote new music that's being released. And a piece was called Chips and Salsa. And when they started, I was like, oh, here we go. And so they started playing. And when I say I heard 2-3 clave and Afro Cuban rhythms and sounds, and I was like, I don't know about y'all, but I don't think I've ever been to a Cuban or Puerto Rican restaurant where they give chips and salsa, and so that I was just already thinking, like, you could have named it something else. And so that right there is appropriation. And so at times it's going to be hard to decipher because the media shows you that, mariachi is in The Simpsons and you think that's what it looks like. Instead of the model that we have here in Texas, even like some of the schools in the valley of Texas that are beyond amazing. And when it comes to their high school mariachi ensembles at the highest caliber. So it's all about your exposure and creating that exposure and that opportunity to understand whether it's appropriate or appreciation. And I'm all for people appreciating other cultures, and that's what I do. And so something that I try to do is we try to take a 2 year, every 2 years, we try to take a trip down to Mexico where my wife's grandparents and pretty much their entire paternal side of her family still lives in San Luis. And given that we have that connection, we want to make sure that our kids are present and aware and develop relationships with that side of the family. So we made a commitment that every 2 years we're going to take some type of trip to Mexico. And so we go into spaces at times that are not as commercial. I don't like the commercial spots in Mexico. I stay away from Cancun, those kind of things. And so whenever I go into these spaces, even me of being of Mexican descent, I allow myself to be immersed into that culture. Whether it be through gastronomia, where it's just I'm there for the food, I'm here for the sounds. I'll never forget when I went to San Luis and I'm like, hey, let's hire a mariachi for New Year's, and then they told me like, the mariachi here are not that good, and I was like, what? We're in the middle of Mexico. Like, well, why would they not be good? They're like, no, but banda here, it hits. And I was like, cool, let's hire a banda. You know what I mean? And so all that to say, if you allow yourself in this level of appreciation, then I think it's valid. And I think there's space for it. Could we be promoting more? Then yes, that's a whole other conversation. Like, let's make space for this other person and not create pseudonames to try to make some money off of somebody's culture and back.
So that leads me to my next thing. I told you only one more question, but I just can't help it, Eric.
Go for it.
This always comes up in the band director groups, but I only try to play good music when we talk about programming more diverse music.
So one of my mentors, because you pick up on the conversation, you pick up, and I remember just saying one time to him, like, they play quality rep. He's like, okay, cool. What's quality rep, Eric? The standards. And he's like, what are the standards? And he goes, Eric, I said the exact same thing one of my first years in graduate school. And my professor asked me the same question. He's like, that is such an empty statement that you're just regurgitating what you've been told or what's been modeled to you or what's been presented on this pedestal, where one could argue that all music has quality, that all music has a place. You know what I mean? Like, it's like anything else. You can pass out if you're programming for your concert band and you pass out 5 pieces for your potential 3 that you might pick, it's not to say that the other 2 that you didn't pick are not quality. You know what I mean? It might be that it didn't fit for your ensemble or the instrumentation or the level of musicianship. So I think there's a time and place for all of that, but it's just, I think it's one to be intentional. Like if you're choosing to want to present that aspect of your curricular planning as a way to make it culturally relevant or expose composers and sounds of different backgrounds and especially marginalized populations that you don't see, then it is being strategic. And it might be, if you're so like gun-ho about being data driven, then say 20% of my programming will be dedicated to X, 30% will be this. I'm going to do a fall program where I include X, Y, and Z. Like, make it consistent. And one thing that I chose to do, I didn't do very many traditional marches for concert contests, for concert and sight reading. I actually did a lot of Spanish marches and paso dobles. And I had a mentor tell me, like, don't do that. Don't do that, because it's so left up to subjugation, to interpretation from the judge, that you might run the risk of not doing it culturally appropriate. And I was like, but my band is predominantly Latino. How could they not do this right? And from that day, I literally programmed Spanish marches. And then I'm just glad that I did several of Gabe Macella's pieces. And then I found a gentleman by the name of Ferran from South America. And his pieces are outstanding. I got to shout out La Rodana. So I used 2 of his pieces. So I say that because that's a cop out saying, I don't program X. Look, man, just what's it going to hurt? You know what I mean? I guess that's the other question. Like, what really is it going to hurt for you to program an Omar Thomas piece, a Kevin Day piece, a Julie Giroux piece? Like, how is that going to hurt anything? You know what I mean? And then some of our colleagues, man, they don't even discuss the program notes. They don't even discuss the composer. It's sit and get. You know what I mean? And so it's about the individual on the podium and the person leading and facilitating the conversation to include and say, hey, by the way, this piece, the origin of this piece, or it was written in this piece, or the person who wrote this piece, or the sounds that are present in here are from the experience of him going down to Mexico and hearing the sounds within the plaza. And so I guess because I know what it felt like to not hear home music in my upbringing, I know how important it is to include it.
Remember your first term of teaching? Learning all the skills that you don't get taught in music school? Managing a transitioning culture in your classroom? Finding out that you have to teach guitar this term? During those early years, we found out that leaning on a community of music educators was important, not only for building that knowledge in ourselves, but also maintaining enough sanity to serve the students right in front of us. Amused is a podcast centered around a community of music teachers. Between the 4 of us, we teach choir, band, orchestra, general, jazz, and marching band at the elementary through collegiate levels. We certainly don't have all the answers, but you're welcome to listen in while we try to find them. Join us while we work through the challenges of music teaching and celebrate the joy of bringing music making into the lives of young people. In each episode, you'll hear stories, both good and bad, about that week of teaching, and we'll try and tackle an issue that one of us is struggling with. Something we're all taught is that music brings people together, but being the only teacher in your subject at a site can be really isolating. We think everyone ought to be a part of a community, and you're welcome to come join ours. Episodes come out on Wednesdays during the school year, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at amusedcast.org.
All right, Eric, are you ready to get on to the final questions?
For sure.
All right, Eric. So the first of these is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
So what comes to mind is the overabundance of competition that we do, especially in the state of Texas, that I've heard of students and overall, like, just from phenomenal music programs, some of the, the top tier ones and some of the biggest names, where they finish their experience and their time in the band programs, and they never want to touch their instrument again. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we get into an unhealthy position, that we are starting to take the joy away of making music. And I think that's where I was careful of how I phrased that, especially within contest season, is that I try to stray away from we have to make a first division to the work is done and we're better for it. I started really focusing more on the process versus the product. And in return, our product became better and we became more competitive. So it allowed, because the kids still want to win, and so I think you have to have some form of competition, and it's healthy, because if you don't, then ultimately you're not gonna grow. If you don't have somebody pushing and pulling on your coattails, then you're gonna stay stagnant and not be able to grow. So, but at the same time, don't go so hard in the paint that the kids literally never want to touch their instrument again, and that's ultimately what I never want to create.
All right, Eric. So the next question is one that many music educators struggle with. And, we have a lot of jokes in our profession. We see the last car in the parking lot stuff. But how do you find a work-life balance as a music teacher?
I didn't find it early in my career. I was literally working myself to death, physically, emotionally, psychologically, all to, fulfill this sense of image that I assumed was supposed to be that one of the number of hours that you spend at work dictate the level of success that your program reflects. And I was definitely wrong, because I started, if you have nothing to pour into your students, then there's no point. And then at what cost? And my cost was my health. And so health and relationships, because it started causing tension within even my own family, that I was being absent to significant moments within my extended family, and just overall, like, focusing way too much on that. So what I started doing is being strategic and more so efficient with the things that we do while we're at work. And given that I was at the helm and being a director of bands with a staff, the pride that I took in was on my last teaching assignment, that I made it clear: when you're here, you're going to work. When you're not, you go home. And if there's nothing to do, then you need to go home. Where I had an assistant one time tell me, like, "Oh no, it's cool, man. I'll hang out. I don't have anything to do." Cool, then go do nothing. And so I think it takes establishing. If you're a young director, this is what I'm going to advocate from the get-go. You establish your communication boundaries. So if you're responding to an email at 10 p.m. at night, then parents and or students are going to expect for you to respond at 10 p.m. at night. And so set up those boundaries from the get-go and say, I'll respond tomorrow. And one practice that I did was, within myself and anybody in my staff, they had to respond to emails within 48 hours. Even if it was, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you. And so it was just a common practice. And so parents knew, okay, they haven't responded yet, but they will within 48 hours. It just became the norm of how we communicated. And then I would advocate and stress, literally the same way that you would. One of my mentors, I mean, he was great at itineraries for like band trips, that he used to do itineraries for his family trips. So it's that level of energy and intensity that we put in to our curriculum planning, to our to drill, to teaching drill outside, to preparing a score. Do the same thing for things that are valuable outside of school, outside of work. And this pandemic has reprioritized my passion and my love for my family and the proximity that I have, especially with my father being in remission of cancer right now. It's putting things back into perspective of things that really matter. Because unfortunately, what happens at our jobs, if we're no longer present or there, or we're not able to complete our responsibilities, guess what's going to happen? Our job's going to be posted and somebody else is going to take that job. But the things that are always going to be there are the things that really matter. And so that's where it's on us, because that work-life balance is so it's not clearly defined. It's situational on everybody's part. But I would say, find things to do outside of what you do in the band hall and the music classroom. Do it intentionally, and at times don't make it even connected to what you do in the band hall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, Eric, we've had a long conversation about a lot of issues, but the question I ask everyone, and you don't have to solve all the problems of the world, is what are the challenges facing music education and bands, and how can we best meet them?
I think a misconception that when people hear my message or what I'm advocating for is to get rid of the traditional aspect of band, but in no way, shape, or form am I saying that, because I'm still a practitioner of that at the collegiate level. I'm a product of that, and there's extreme benefits in what I did. What I'm advocating for is the space, the extension of the reach of what we could do with band, and so what the challenge is the lack of representation of marginalized communities and voices and people. And one of the things that we have to really dig into is how can we increase that access? How can we create multiple points of entry, especially with the system that we have? If a kid was not able to have band in middle school, but now you're preventing them from having it in high school because they didn't have those 3 years or junior high level experience, why are we doing that? And so it's about looking at our policies even within our own school and our own program to say, you know what, this kid was a English language learner and had to take remedial English classes, and now he doesn't and has a chance to have an elective. It's our opportunity to allow him in, and I hold the key for that. So I think one of the challenges that we face is the recruitment of a more diverse student population that would accurately reflect the population that we serve.
If I had invented a time machine and I could take you back to your high school graduation that afternoon, what would you tell yourself?
Don't party too hard. No, but I think your mission and what you're trying to do, and to provide a space and to serve, especially under resource areas and your community that brought you up and gave you so much, is the right one. Stay true to who you are. And I don't regret anything that I did from now until then, because obviously all those lived experiences have allowed me to become who I am today. But I think the biggest thing right there, especially that young Eric, that was very, very enthusiastic about going to college and breaking stereotypes and just be true to the work and in service of others.
Excellent. All right, Eric, if you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would conduct, and why?
Man, because obviously I've heard your podcast before, and I've heard this question, but I've honestly thought of this question even prior to listening to it, and it has to be, which is actually on my bucket list, and I hope to do it one day, is Moncayo's Wampango, and it speaks to, given that there aren't very many wind band transcriptions of this, you see it more prevalently in symphony orchestras. And so when I hear Wampango, and especially with the wind band transcription that was done by Dr. Abe Ramirez, I got to see this performance by the 2011 TMEA 4A All-State Band, which is now considered 5A, the second largest school population division of Texas. And so, you're hearing some of the best musicians at the high school level on stage at the Lila Cockrell Theater in San Antonio. But then on top of that, I'm seeing a Latino male on the podium conducting a piece that speaks to what one would say my intersections of my identity, of the folk songs of Mexico with being presented through the medium of wind band. And not only was the musical selection spoke volumes to me, but his actions. So prior to conducting that piece, he turned around and acknowledged his parents in the balcony and spoke Spanish to them, and then translated for the crowd, saying that he would not be the man who he is without them. Gracias a my yapa. And I was just like, man, if I can do that one day. Then he turns around and then conducts it. And then he was doing like this little hop on the podium and getting into it. Just an outstanding performance. But what happened after that? So I was obviously inspired that I emailed him, that I'm like, whoa, this was so amazing that a Latino band director from Texas that, spoke in Spanish to his parents and acknowledged them. I was like, I see myself in you, sir. Thank you for everything you do. And he responded with gratitude and stuff. But the thing that really upset me and motivated me even more, there's this, and I think it still exists, but it's the Yellow Board forum on Texas, where all the band directors would go on and anonymously be able to post forums and threads. So they made a whole thread about this performance, talking about his etiquette was inappropriate, that the band was playing too loud, that it was too edgy, that all these things that I was just like, oh my goodness, y'all missed the point, and so that it spoke volumes to me to break those stereotypes and that narrative, to interject and be a front, just a spearhead and a model that Dr. Abe Ramirez was for me, even indirectly, because we've never even spoken in person, but just to see that But then overall, to know the history of Huapango, when you hear about Moncayo, he was a classically trained pianist and percussionist that ended up moving to Mexico City and was charged by the conductor of the National Symphony there to go to Veracruz to go hear the sounds of what's happening there, because it was a celebration of mestizo people. And so it's a mixture of fandango, which is the event that's held there in Veracruz, and I think a Nahuatl term, the Aztec language, which means like wood plank. So it ended up being Huapango. And so the form and the genre is a son Huapango, which is extremely prevalent through the Huasteca or mariachi music. And so the Huapango is a mixture of those several melodies of Huapangos that became what some have called in Mexico the second national anthem.
Eric, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote, knowing that we're in July of 2020, middle of COVID-19?
So, I got to self-promote two things, and that's Prairie View A&amp University. So if you're in the Texas or even out of state, if you're considering a college in a more, I guess you could say, smaller environment to learn from and have more accessibility to your professors, definitely check us out. That's Prairie View A&amp University, pvamu.edu. The second is, of course, check out our podcast. So we're on all streaming platforms. We have a handle, Pod the Score, at Pod the Score. And those two things is, but specifically right now, I've put a lot of energy with Justin into promoting this podcast and this platform. And a lot of reasons that we're doing that is because we all know the meta narrative that exists right now about urban music education and has existed is that filled with and saturated with assumptions and stereotypes, and it's not productive, especially if somebody's teaching that. So what we're trying to do is provide a platform and a space that presents a different image and voice, and especially we seek out successful, however you define successful within our profession, to promote these voices and these lived experiences. Because if we listen to them and what they've been able to do, hopefully that can reach somebody and put in some tangible strategies into your classroom. So that's the Score podcast, at Pod the Score, on every social media site.
Yeah, and I'll give you guys a plug. It's a terrific podcast. You guys are doing great work.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
All right, Eric, how can people get in touch with you?
So I have a website where we host the Score podcast, and that's revivalmusicproject.org. And so I'm available. I've been able to do a few guest lectures throughout some universities throughout the country. And I wrote some different articles actually Justin and I are having an article that's coming up in the Southwestern Musician, coming up pretty soon in TMEA's magazine. We have some, and I failed to mention this, but we have a session coming up with F-Flat Books, so we're going to be presenting with them. The CMA Foundation has us coming up with a webinar. But revivalmusicproject.org is my website. You can hit me up on email as well. That's Jimenez, Jim as in Mary, N as in Nancy, EZ, the letter E, 86 at gmail.com. And I'm on every social media website as well. Connect with me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Jimenez 86. I'm always looking to connect with other people and just, whether we chat or just connect, and hopefully meet at Midwest one day when we bring it back, or TMEA, whatever the case may be, and just looking to connect with more people. But feel free to reach out to me if hopefully what you've picked up from this episode is I am here to help. I'm here to serve. And if I can't, and if I don't have the answer, I'll do my best to connect you with somebody that does.
Awesome. Eric, thanks so much for the time. I had a great conversation with you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for everything you do.